to set trucks alight in 3 provinces. It started with 6 trucks torched on Van Reenen's Pass in the KwaZulu-Natal at the weekend. Now, since then, at least 14 more have been set on fire in KZN, Mpumalanga and Limpopo. Now, let's discuss this with former police detective Jeremy Vearey. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Of course, you know, this is a huge issue for us in this country, not just economically, but also, you know, the safety of our truck drivers at the end of the day. What's your take on this?
I think I share the previous speaker's concern with the lack of crime intelligence, particularly the type of intelligence of early warning nature that is based on well-placed sources amongst the groups who perpetrate that type of violence in an organized way. But you know, there was one thing that concerned me about the police person who commented in the KZN environment. You know, she said something about we are on the ground gathering intelligence. Now, let me firstly tell you, it is sad for me as an ex-intelligence officer to hear that somebody who speaks on these matters do not understand what intelligence is. Firstly, you don't gather intelligence. You gather information in the police or in any intelligence agency, and that information gets evaluated in terms of the reliability of its source, and also in terms of its probability of truth. And in order to do that, you need to correlate it with other information that you have in the system. And once you've gone through that whole cycle and tested things in that, you can talk about intelligence, information that has become reliable enough as intelligence to act upon. Now, for that is an analyzed product. So when we speak on the ground, we talk about gathering information from the police. Detectives gather information from informants. Visible policing who works, the van that patrols your street gathers information. All of that information goes into an information management system that evaluates it, and then it gets up through a crime intelligence process, and then it becomes operational. Now, firstly, that was the first concern here to me, that we have that degree of lack of knowledge from senior police officers about what this thing is. The second problem is, despite that lack of knowledge, that within the crime intelligence environment, we do not have intelligence that can inform accurate policing of these problems. And I want to explain why. The first part of the problem is, if you look at the crop we have now, there are very few people who are handlers who are competent enough to recruit across the broad threat terrain, from organized crime to political violence. Because, you know, you can see things on a camera, you can see things via satellite, you can see contact patterns on a cell phone, but unless you have a source that can identify who was there and what was said, you will never see the intention behind all that information or actions, the participants in actions that you targeted through those various forms of observation. So those are some of the realities, you see. Partly it is a systemic weakness that comes with low levels of in-place sources, and also an inability to look at the history of a problem. I mean, if you look at that highway, I mean, we all know we expect problems to be there. Okay, so simple observation and consistent coverage, targeting of what is abnormal to that environment. And I'm going to explain something to you. When an intelligence officer looks at the geographical environment, like me, I first determine what are the normal patterns of activity, patterns of movement of people, and then I look for what stands out. Okay? And I target according to what stands out to find out what is exactly happening there and who's responsible for what is happening there without the need for in-place deep sources. And once I have done this process, then I start penetrating that environment to gather sources. Now this requires a highly competent crime intelligence service, which we do not have as evidence in threats in Jeremy, and or other threats in general constantly.
Exactly. So that was going to be my next question, because I wanted to find out from you, is it that we lack intelligence completely in this country? Because, I mean, we've been dealing with organized crime now for how long? So clearly we can't be at this point now where we don't have a proper crime intelligence fighting unit. So how is it that we are here dealing with a problem like this again? Is it because we're just simply not learning from our mistakes in the past, or is it just because there isn't priority placed on this?
You see, there is priority placed on it, but by who? There's a priority that emphasizes great investment in reactive policing, response to it. In other words, the standard, put a lot of uniforms with guns out there and raid them, and most of the money goes into that. There is not sufficient investment, I believe, in developing the competency of crime intelligence in this country to produce crime intelligence and investing, resourcing detectives in a specialized way, effectively, to handle some of this organized crime and violence we have at the scale at which it is. Now, if we look at that scale that is repetitive over the past, I don't know how many years, 20, 30 years, and the growth of that, one would have thought that it would have been a very simple management decision when we look at the budget, for example, and what parts of policing gets the most money, that a lot of it would be spent on detectives who are the only people in the police who actually catch crooks and put them on trial and put them in border. Everything else, from visible policing and intelligence, is support. And if even that leg fails and there's not proper investment in improving the competency of crime intelligence to produce something called intelligence, then, we are never going to arrest the problem.
And Jeremy, just, coming back to these recent truck attacks, from your expert opinion, I mean, you've dealt with similar cases previously. So what do you think, is behind these attacks, and how should our current intelligence, go about trying to find out who is actually behind these attacks?
Okay, the first thing, I think the problem is if you politicize crime or try to always contextualize it as something any different from gangsters trying to extort people, and you start thinking that way in the police or seeing the problem like that, you find different solutions for that. You try and experiment with different ways of addressing it. To me, what happens there is plain out gangsterism, and they should be dealt under the Organized Crime Act. Okay, there is definite benefits that come through running the type of criminal enterprises that do what they do there to stop that kind of traffic. And we should start tackling these people as organized crime enterprises. And if they fit the definition of a gang, not in the Cape Flat sense, but in the sense that they are a group of people with a common motive and identify themselves physically or otherwise by some modus operandi or in a particular way, well, Chapter 4 of the gang provisions of the Organized Crime Act should come into the picture. And I really don't see why that is not being used. We have such powerful legislation in the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, and I wonder why we haven't had cases developed against people including the looters before, in that when we had that crisis, and the Prevention of Organized Crime Act. Why are we treating them differently?
Exactly. So, unfortunately, I'll have to leave it there, Jeremy Vearey. Thank you so much. Former SAPS General and independent crime expert, of course. Also earlier, Chris de Kock, who joined Tumelo in discussing these latest truck attacks. And, of course, what's the root cause behind it?